Alright, let's talk. I've been seeing a lot of questionable things floating around on Twitter and Reddit and various places where people are brewing deck lists for the post-ban world, and I just wanted to briefly address 5 of the biggest deck building sins that I'm seeing going on right now. I'm not going to take the time to edit this with all sorts of flashy images and air horns and stuff of that nature, but I'm just going to try to drop some knowledge on you real quick. Number 1. Stop trying to shove Uro into every deck. Uro is great. Uro was one of the cards that was on the table to be banned. In Legacy, it did not get banned. That is a very good card. You should be considering playing it. But stop trying to shove it into decks where it doesn't belong. I see all of these Maverick players and Loam players just immediately gravitating towards Uro. Uro has a real cost. You need to be able to escape it. And you really need to be able to escape it maybe twice in a game, very consistently. And now let me ask you, how well does a deck like Maverick actually fill the graveyard? And the answer is, it doesn't. You have fetch lands and maybe some Swords to Plowshares, and otherwise you're requiring your creatures to die in order to fuel your graveyard. How many cards does a Maverick or a 4-color Loam deck put into the graveyard per turn cycle? 1? Maybe? 1.5 on a good turn? You're not fueling Uro fast enough to escape Uro and then escape it again. And so I think it's a mistake to just try to shove a powerful card into a shell that it's not going to be powerful into. Let me make an absurd comparison, but this should get the point across. You don't play Chalice of the Void in your cantrip deck, right? Because that card doesn't fit there. You have better things that you can be doing, and even if the card is really powerful, if it's not a good home for it, you're better off using your resources in other ways. Now, if you are a blue-based cantrip deck, yeah, you should probably be thinking about green for Uro. But decks like Maverick and 4-color Loam that aren't cantripping and can't fuel the graveyard particularly well, except in specific niche situations, probably shouldn't be looking at playing this as a starting point. Play safer, more conservative lists, and you'll probably be happier. Number 2, be thinking about what removal people are going to be playing. Right now, I am seeing a lot of Delver lists floating around Twitter that have Young Pyromancers and True Name Nemesis. And the first thing I thought when we got this set of bannings was, okay, now Plague Engineer comes back. And I see people building these deck lists with all of these X1 creatures when Plague Engineer is likely to be one of the most played creatures in Legacy, or at the very least one of the most played sideboard cards. And that doesn't make sense to me. I think you do want to be thinking about removal, but is an X1 creature really where you want to be to dodge removal? I'm not sure that the answer to that question is yes. And as the metagame develops and we start to get a better picture of this, you'll get a feel for what things you need to be dodging. You need to be dodging Abrupt Decay, Fatal Push, Swords to Plowshares, Lightning Bolt, and you can adjust your creature suite accordingly. But if you can avoid playing X1 creatures right now, I think that is wise. All right, next up. Respect basic lands. Basic lands are so effing good. This is always true. But right now, all the Death and Taxes players and Maverick players are like, oh shit. Is it my time? Is it my time to go? Wasteland you, Knight of the Reliquary Wasteland you? Yeah, they're ready. They're coming back. And that means that having access to basic lands is a good thing. I've been sent a couple of 4 to 5 color greed piles, and people ask, hey Phil, what do you think of this? And I just respond with one word. Greed. A lot of those greed piles got to get away with it because Arcum's Astrolabe helped them fix it. But right now, I think we're going to see a record high number of wastelands, and we'll also probably see the return of things like Blood Moon. So if you can be playing a deck that has some basic lands in it, I would encourage you to do so. Next up, I see a lot of decks building sideboards like they were building sideboards in the previous era. And by that, I mean your sideboard is tuned very specifically to fight a narrow subset of strategies. In our previous metagame, your sideboard your sideboard needed to deal with whatever the big combo deck of the week was, and then it needed to deal with Snow, and it needed to deal with Rogue Delver. And that's basically what your sideboard did with a little bit of flexibility beyond that. And right now, the metagame is just like so incredibly open, and people are trying out all sorts of things. And so, right now, more generic and more flexible cards are often going to be really useful. You don't know exactly what it is you need to be fighting, and we're probably going to see greater variety of decks in leagues than we've seen in the past year and a half right now. And that means that you can't be playing these super narrow cards that hate on one specific deck anymore. You need to be playing things that have a broad application. Um, to make my point here, you're not playing against one Delver deck right now, right? There's people testing blue red. There's people testing bug. There's people still playing rug. There's people trying Death Shadow. There's people trying out things like Magmatic Channeler that might have been overshadowed by other cards of the previous format. And so even if you're just trying to face something as generic as Delver, there's 5, 6, maybe 7 variants of that floating around right now. And until we have a better picture of what exactly you need to be fighting, you need to have access to a lot of tools that are going to be generically useful. All right, and my final deck building sin, I think I should just sum up as things that cost 4 mana. So with Oko gone, a lot of people are gravitating towards trying to play bad overcosted cards. And I would like to remind you that this is still Legacy, right? This is still a hyper optimized format with the most powerful cards of all time. And I see people trying to bring back these 4-drops, and I look at them and go, but why though? Remember, Jace the Mind Sculptor is the bar of what a 4-drop in Legacy should look like. And like below that, maybe we have things like Palace Jailer as like the other bar of something that's main deckable, or maybe like Alurin, something that wins you the game. If your 4-drop doesn't win you the game or serves some very niche important role, you probably should not be thinking about playing that right now. I think a lot of people are trying to shove in like the fun ofs right now while the format is sort of unknown. Just get people dead. Like play the cards that you know are good, and then if you see that the format is significantly slower than everyone expects, then maybe try to squeeze some value over those cards that go slightly bigger than your opponent. But right now, there are plenty of people who are saying, like, hey, while everyone's trying to figure this out, I'm going to play Doomsday, or I'm going to play TES, and I am just going to go and get you dead while you're, messing around with your Keranos, or your Questing Beast, or your Court, or whatever, fun, interesting card you're trying to play around with. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to be competitive, keep keep the deck slick, keep it lean. It's much harder to fight against like a well-oiled, well-functioning machine than it is to play against, something like Nick Fit, where you're a little bit more clunky and a little bit less consistent. All right, so recapping those top 5 sins of current deck building brews in Legacy. Stop shoving Uro into decks where it clearly doesn't belong. Be thinking about what removal your opponents are going to play and what threats you can play to invalidate some or all of that removal. Play basic lands, if you can. Be prepared for a wider variety of decks than you were in the past year or year and a half, and build your sideboards appropriately. And try to keep your cards to a reasonable mana cost by Legacy standards, unless you have a very good reason why you should be playing something. If you're playing something that's 4 mana and it doesn't win you the game within a turn cycle or two, really question whether or not that should be in your deck. All right, that's all I've got for you today. If you enjoyed this little bit of advice here, throw me a like, throw me a comment with some of your thoughts about deck building in Legacy right now. All right, have a great rest of the day.